The Red Cross doesn't exist to raise money. We raise money because we exist to help people.
If you had a magic wand, what would be the one thing that you would wave away?
Again, I've been here 15 years. There are processes that haven't changed in 15 years. Think one way that organizations, any organization, kind of gets CX or journey mapping wrong is they solve a problem that actually doesn't exist. People every year over-report how much they give to charity. Have we validated that somebody giving us money was the right thing to do? Have we convinced them that, yes, we took your hard-earned money and it's helping somebody now the way you intended it to?
Welcome to the Experience Edge, the podcast where we dive deep with industry leaders, pioneers, and CX experts to explore what it really takes to create meaningful customer-centric business impact.
My guest today, Andrew George. He wears two hats as both direct marketing strategist and customer experience advocate at the Red Cross in Canada, where he expertly balances the metrics-driven demands of marketing with the empathy-driven needs of the customer experience. And with a focus on both worlds, Andrew understands the push to generate responses, acknowledging that sometimes transactional nature of the field is also a reality, but it's tough through CX to actually do this. And Andrew finds deeper fulfillment connecting with donors one-on-one to better understand their experiences, even when the conversation might be challenging. And these insights help to really drive genuine, impactful relationships with donors, which is meaningful to the growth of Red Cross's programs. A fun fact, I don't know, you can fact check me later, Andrew, you are a lifelong Tottenham Hotspur supporter. That's soccer, for those of you guys who don't know. He knows all about loyalty and dedication. So you also dabbled in the world of voice acting, lending your voice to small commercials and narrations, and an experience that adds another layer of versatility to your storytelling skills. So I think we got a lot to cover today. But first of all, I'm excited to have you. Welcome to the pod, Andrew.
Thanks, Yolam. Yeah, thanks very much. I do like to mention my support of Tottenham Hotspur because Tottenham never wins anything. And so to be loyal to a club like Tottenham, I think you really have to understand what loyalty means.
When I played FIFA back in the days, I used to pick Tottenham a lot. I loved that club, and it was always like an underdog when you played the online league. So
sounds about right.
I can relate to it. I wouldn't say I'm a fan as yours, but definitely love your attitude here. I want to start with laying setting the foundation and getting a lay of the land here, because marketing, Red Cross, not having a product, direct marketing program. So let me start there. You don't sell a product. You are in marketing. So who are your customers?
Yeah, that's a great question, Yolam. And so our customers are our donors. And for the most part, our donors are individual Canadians. Certainly, we have corporate organizations as well, and different types of donors. But our main donor is that individual donor. It could be anybody across the country. And I think sometimes people assume, well, that has to be somebody really rich. And most of the time, that's just not the case. I mean, certainly, we have people who give very large sums of money, but most of our direct marketing is driven around those individual donors who give, anywhere from say $50 to a couple of $100 and often beyond that. But that really is who our customer is. It's that individual Canadian donor.
So this is where marketing comes in, making sure that the brand, you have a lot of brand equity behind the Red Cross in general, starts to work for you. When we talk about customer experience, are you talking about donor experience, or is it actually the beneficiaries of where that money is actually put into the programs that you're doing? What does customer experience mean to you?
Yeah, so the money that donors give, of course, they can earmark that or designate that where they want. The most common way that people think of us is when there's a worldwide disaster. So when there's just that attention on that need somewhere in the world, wherever that can be. So that money goes to supporting people in need at that time. Certainly the Red Cross does a lot of work within Canada. So the Red Cross has massive brand exposure. You'd be hard pressed to find somebody who's never heard of the organization. The brand understanding is a little bit more complex. The Red Cross in Canada does a lot of different domestic programs that the people are far less aware of. But when we look at that experience, so you're absolutely right. It is the donor experience, because they're not customers. They're not consuming anything. They're donating, their hard-earned money to make a difference, to meet those values that, most of us have within us to try to help somebody or something that goes beyond us. So, in order to keep people donating, though, when we look at retention and donor retention is, we do need to optimize that experience. How do we report back to somebody? How do we make it easy to donate if they have, something they need, if they need their tax receipt, if they, want to remove themselves from a mailing list? How easy do we make that? Because while, we don't often think in terms of competition in, the nonprofit sector, we're not the only game in town. There are other organizations that people can donate to. And certainly if they're more engaging or if they make that experience easier and more fulfilling, we would lose share of wallet. So that's really what we're focused on with our donor experience.
So you mentioned share of wallet, you mentioned retention. So can I assume that these are some of the key metrics, the KPIs that you as your whole marketing or CX organization is focused on? Or are there different aspects of the experience that are even more important, how you measure actually if you're successful? Because a lot of people listening, especially who are stuck in the CX silo, they're thinking about NPS, they're thinking about CSAT and sending more surveys and reporting that back up. But ultimately, it's about retaining your customers, making sure they come back, and that's where your retention metrics come in. But how are you thinking about measuring that experience, and what have you seen be useful? Maybe even talk about blending marketing and CX and how that plays out at the scale you work in.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned just the wearing of the two hats at the top of the call with direct marketing, and direct marketing is all about response rates. It's about average transaction size, number of transactions in a year, churn. So all of those things that for-profit businesses are accustomed to measuring, and that's really for the past while, what the organization has been focused on. And, direct marketing is a very easy conversation to have with your executives or your finance team, because you can say, we're going to send out this many 100,000 pieces of mail or emails. This is the response rate we expect to get back. Here's the total revenue. Here's the total cost. It's a very easy accounting conversation, but, certainly as, my knowledge of CX, or for us, DX, has grown, we've started to really try to look at some more attitudinal measures. So what does effort look like? What does, satisfaction look like? Because again, we look at retention, and satisfaction is typically what correlates with retention. How easy did we make it for somebody to give? Did we make it difficult? Did they have to wait on hold, with our call center for a long period of time? So that's really where we're trying to move. And you mentioned blended. We're trying to blend those things together, because when you have that kind of attitudinal data, the NPS or commitment scoring or whatever that might be, you do have to find a way to correlate that with the finances. Otherwise, your direct marketers really aren't going to care if we say, well, satisfaction's gone down 2 points, and they'll say, well, we just had our best revenue period ever. But if you can actually show that satisfaction or commitment or effort are actually impacting, financial metrics, that I think is kind of how you start getting people to buy into what CX and what donor experience or customer journey mapping is.
So can we dig into this a little bit? Because I think it's an important point. Like, you make it sound very easy, but tying these things together is really hard in practice. You've been at the Red Cross for over 14 years. I'm sure you've had some evolutions of thinking in this way yourself, but also for your teams and the way you operate. Can you speak a bit about how that actually plays out in practice? Maybe give an example of what that actually means and how you're pulling it off, not just once, but consistently.
Yeah, you're right. It certainly sounds a whole lot easier than it was to put into practice. Having, data scientists or developers, build those things, blend those things together is a challenge. And we've often used external vendors to help us to do that, where we can, amalgamate different data sets. So, one of the ways that we found has been useful is measuring, commitment to the cause, the Red Cross mission, especially with what we call our monthly donors. So these are, basically monthly subscribers who have given us their credit card or their direct debit accounts. And every month, $25, $30 is taken off their credit card or from their bank account. And so it's a really impactful source of revenue. We have over 100,000 monthly donors. So you can multiply that by $30 a month times 12 is a sizable amount of money. We have found that measuring that commitment very, very early, that experience signing up, has a very strong correlation with how likely somebody is to continue giving. So that's something that, we've been working at now for some time. And that's why it is critical to get those attitudinal values at the very start of that experience, again, in that journey map, and then correlate that with lifetime value. So I'd say that's certainly one of our best examples of how we blended direct marketing metrics with CX metrics.
Are you thinking about, you mentioned journey maps, are you thinking about this as you have that donor experience as an end-to-end journey where there's all these different points in where people start and exit? Or when you think about journey maps, are these more like one-off projects you do to figure out one part of the experience to improve it? How are you thinking about journeys in your work?
Yeah, the cheap answer is certainly doing both, but for the most part, we do break down our journeys into, say, an onboarding journey, a service journey if somebody needs to, cancel their donation, or if they need to get their tax receipts. We do micro journeys when we look at, well, how is somebody engaging with a contact center? Are they getting stuck somewhere in our IVR? Typically, though, we try to take a bigger view. So, one of our, I'm sure we'll talk about this later, but one of our first journeys was what we called our Ukraine donor journey. So 2022, the war in Ukraine, the conflict that's going on there, that was really the first time that we looked at that end-to-end experience. And, we mirrored it around just the buyer cycle. So how did they become aware of us? Did they shop around to see were there other organizations to give to? What was that point where they decided to actually transact? And then even afterwards, what did that engagement experience look like? And that was really the first time that we were looking at, the journey from end to end, from, really from start to finish, taking, some attitudinal data, talking to donors, and then just mapping all of that out along the way and really trying to find, where do those attitudes come into play? Where could we step in and improve that experience? Where could we make it more likely that somebody was going to give? Where could we confirm that, yes, this was a good decision? So we mostly try to take that long-term view with our journeys.
What was the most surprising thing for you in covering that end-to-end journey? Because there's always this thing that you don't expect, but it's there when you start talking to your donors, when you really dig into what they need and what's holding them back from making progress along that journey, if they want to do that at all. Like, what is the thing that most surprised you when doing this Ukrainian donation journey?
What I found is after somebody had transacted, something that came up in especially just on our one-on-one interviews, sometimes in our surveys that we ran, when there's a major disaster worldwide, typically, I shouldn't say typically, but often, the government of Canada will step in and match donations up to a certain amount. And that's a really powerful endorsement. And it also means that somebody's donation is going that much further. If somebody's giving $100, it might be worth $200 or $300 based on the match parameters. And so that is a really key reason why people end up giving to us, particularly new donors who have never given to us before, just that power of that match. What we ended up finding, though, and we didn't even ask this question, it just came up over and over again unprovoked, was the match. And they said, I knew there was a match going on and I think my donation was matched, but I'm actually not sure. And that was really interesting to us because it just kept on coming up. And it taught us that we had to be really clear before and after the match that we confirmed that, because this was a really critical step in that process for that donor, was that donation matched? And we certainly did mention it at various points, but what it told us is it wasn't enough. We felt we were doing enough to validate that, yes, the donation was matched, but we've actually found out that we can actually do a whole lot better. We're trying to build that in right now, just to mention that, just that repetition of, yes, your $100 donation was $300. And again, it makes somebody feel like we fulfilled what they came to us for. And that was to have that donation matched and to make an even bigger impact.
Help me understand the initiation of an end-to-end journey process like this. Obviously, there was a good reason to start this. There was an event in the world. Yeah. But if I did my research correctly, you have about 14,000 volunteers. You have over 4,000 members on staff for the Canadian Red Cross, that is. It takes a whole lot of people to come together to make this end-to-end journey work. But it also needs to start somewhere. Like, how did that came to be? And who was in your team? What are the decisions that you had to go through to get this end-to-end journey in place and start building and delivering this?
Yeah, so I think, why we started, even before Ukraine, again, being a very heavy direct marketing organization where we sent a lot of direct mail, a lot of digital advertising, email, telemarketing, and et cetera, et cetera. Like a lot of big organizations, though, we were fairly siloed. And so each business unit was sending their own communications, using whatever channel it was that they were responsible for. And when we started to map that, you could really see just how inconsistent sometimes that experience could be for a donor, where they might have received 4 emails, 2 pieces of mail, a text message, a phone call, all in a very short period of time. And that was really not a very good experience. Often those touch points were not joined together. They had different messaging. They looked different sometimes. They looked like, you were getting solicited by, 2 different organizations when, we were the same team. So that really actually helped us build in the people that we needed to bring in to understand, journey management, to say, well, we're all doing our best and trying to reach our metrics, but maybe we could be a little bit more efficient. Maybe we need to work a little bit more effectively together so that we build a better experience, so that donors aren't telling us, you're over soliciting me, you're sending me too much. So that was a way that we really started to build that out. And we evolved from there to using journey management as a problem solving framework. So depending on, was there a journey that was, a high potential for revenue? Was it a high brand risk? Was it a pain point? And the big thing I like to sell with journey management is that it adds that element of empathy. So all of us are consumers in our daily lives. Most of us, donate to charities that are important to us. But when we're working in our 9-to-5 jobs, Monday to Friday, we forget all that. We forget what it's like to actually be a consumer. We just focus on the processes that we ourselves build and the metrics that we need to meet. We often actually forget who it is that we're selling to. And so when you can kind of get that aha moment from staff, you really start to build out much better experiences because you all start to understand the pain points and the opportunities that come with that.
What have you found useful or effective in getting that aha moment, other than just looking at a screen and going like, okay, that makes sense? Like, what is helpful to really get them who are not maybe exposed to donors in their day-to-day to understand and to relate to them and to really emphasize with what they have to go through to make a donation? Like, what is useful for you to get other people seeing things the same way you do? Like, any things that you've practiced or put in place to create that like aha moments in the team that you're working with?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of tools that we've used and have evolved over time. So typically, our team will build out what we call the current state. What does it look like to a donor right now? What's everything they're receiving in a given period of time? Like I mentioned, how many emails and how many pieces of direct mail, how many phone calls, what did they see online, the news, that sort of thing. So bringing that understanding and making sure that your stakeholders all agree that, yeah, that generally is what we would expect that experience to look like. And then building, for us, it's a donor persona or a profile, no different than you would do at any for-profit organization as well. And, this takes, a little bit of work. So we use a combination of environics, using postal code data, which, tells us a lot about, our donors, where they live, what they value, all that sort of stuff. And then those one-on-one interviews are really powerful. I found them considerably more powerful than, any survey that I've ever done. And so it creates person that you're actually building an experience for. And so it really grounds you in what you're trying to do. So I always use the example when we're brainstorming new ideas. Almost every time somebody's like, well, we need an app. We have to develop an app. And I'll say, okay, well, is an app useful for Walter, our 70-year-old donor who, lives in Mississauga? Well, maybe not. Not to say that Walter doesn't use the internet, but maybe Walter's not going to download an app to start doing his donations through. So that's very helpful. I think the other big piece is the needs list that we do through our design thinking process. And again, that really comes out of those one-on-one interviews that we do. And the number of interviews you need is sort of dependent on the complexity of the journey. Typically, you can do as few as 10, and you'll identify almost all of the needs. We did about 25, I think, for the last project that we were doing, because that experience was a little bit more complex. But the question you asked, that aha moment with the match that I mentioned, where donors not knowing if that donation was matched, that only came out through our one-on-one interviews, but it came out over and over again. And as I mentioned, it was unprovoked. And so when I'm writing that needs list out for people to look at before brainstorming, I have a whole bunch of stars written by it. And I say, this has a bunch of stars by it because it came up over and over again. So when we're trying to create a journey, an ideal state or an aspirational state, we actually have kind of like a data list to check off against. Or we can say, did we mention the match enough times? Was the experience personalized? Was it trustworthy? And so what I like to call that is it really kind of harnesses creativity. Otherwise, what happens is people come together, they have great intentions, they put stuff down on a whiteboard, but there's nothing that really filters that creativity down to the problem you're trying to solve. And I think that's something that happens a lot in journey mapping. or any experience creation is we sometimes solve problems that don't actually exist because we're not being empathetic. We're not putting ourselves in our customers or our donors' shoes. So those couple of tools we found really useful to build buy-in and just create better experiences.
So just to clarify, there is a difference between the needs list and like that data checklist almost, like, or a checklist that you use to cross off, like, did we do this? Did we get that? Did we get this? Are those two different things, or is that actually the same tool that you've put in place?
Yeah, they're actually the same thing. And so like it really is just that checklist you get to run your ideas against and how many did you actually meet. And so often they come from, the data that we pull from. We'll pull from voice of the customer. We'll pull from, from the contact center, from email surveys, but we'll really pull from, the one-on-one interviews, because in a survey and often, in the voice of the customer, you get fairly high level feedback. But when you actually have somebody on the phone or you're on Zoom, you can really dig really deep into actually what their values are. And there's some really creative ways to, to ask questions. One that we found, really interesting is we ask our donors, do you have any concerns for future generations? And they all paused and they thought about it. And it was so interesting because, some of them talked about, affordability of housing. Some talked about the environment, social media impact. And it really helps you to understand somebody's values and gets at the heart of why they actually want to give or what they need.
How did that list come to be? I mean, maybe you should give a few examples of other things that you're checking off on that list, because I think these kind of tools are make or break in building a true customer experience or donor-centric function. Because you need to have processes that everyone can do, because not everyone is a good interviewer. Not everyone knows how to analyze the data, and sometimes you're just looking for confirmation bias, right? And you want to prove your point because we want to do that app, right? So I'm looking for 3 data points. So yeah, there we go. So what is on that list? And maybe like explain a few things on that list, and then how did you put that together?
Yeah, so like that one I've come back to a couple times with the match. It came up numerous times in our conversations with people, and so we knew that we had to build some kind of business specifications around, and that is a bit of a guess in terms of, well, we mentioned the match twice now, maybe we need to mention it 4 times. We're going to double that and see if there's an impact. Another one that often comes up is the experience has to be able to be personalized by the donor, and so that's what do they learn about from us? How often do we contact them? When do we contact them? And so, but we need to have the data system to be able to do that, the preference center to be able to do that. But again, when we're building that experience, we ask, can a donor actually personalize it? Have we given them the opportunity to personalize that experience? And then, one that comes up a lot for the Red Cross, and I'm sure it would for a lot of other nonprofits, is the experience is trustworthy. Have we validated that somebody giving us money was the right thing to do? Have we convinced them that, yes, we took your hard-earned money and it's helping somebody now the way you intended it to?
If you're enjoying this conversation, don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast channel and leave a review. It makes all the difference. The Experience Edge podcast is where I interview business leaders, CX pioneers, and the best designers who share their insight on creating business impact, having an edge on the customer experience. If you want more exclusive content and behind-the-scenes access, check out the Experience Edge podcast on YouTube and LinkedIn so you don't miss a thing. Now let's get back to the conversation. You mentioned, or you talk a lot about one-on-one interviews, and I want to dig into that a bit, because in the age of AI, like, it's so easy to analyze all the unstructured data today. So the emphasis is shifting towards talking to your customers. We have more time on our hands that we used to spend crunching the numbers, crunching the data, understanding the patterns. That is now all done for us. I mean, not all, but assuming in a year from now it will be all done for us. So then a lot of people can participate, or more people can participate. How do you structure your one-on-one interviews? And I know you are a skilled design thinking expert, or you've built all those skills over the years. There's an art, but there's also a science to this. Can you speak a bit about how you set up the interviews or the script for those interviews so that you are actually getting truly deeply into the needs and the wants and the desires of the people you speak to?
Sure. Yeah. And like you said, it is a skill set experience that I've acquired. I'm sure I was bad at it when I started, but learning how to ask questions. But yeah, we all go in with the same script. And when I say script, it's not meant to be read verbatim. It's teaching your staff where to pick up on something. When that donor or customer has said something meaningful, it's where to kind of bypass. It's like, all right, this really isn't that important. But coming up with that list of questions, what do we want to learn about this experience? What are our biases? Or starting even there, design thinking, you have to start from your own experience, but you have to then challenge that experience. So we might assume the experience is this. Well, did it actually turn out that way when we analyzed it, when we used, Google Analytics for the hard data, when we asked the donor why they gave, did they actually say what we expected them to? And then just owning that and allowing yourself to be open to surprise. But I think when you bring a diverse group of stakeholders, coming up with that list of questions, what is it we all want to learn? And what are we going to do with that information? And how are we going to ask that question in a way that's not yes or no, in a way that, is going to allow that person to extrapolate? And one thing I like to say is, each question, the customer or donor should tell you a story. They should have to pause for a second, look in the back of their brain and think, okay, this is why I give to the Red Cross, or this is why, I purchase, these air miles or something like that, as opposed to just yes or no, which you have on the tip of your tongue. You really want somebody to connect to a memory, because that's where you start to get really great qualitative information that you then have to break down. And we use AI, we use text analysis at various points, and it's pretty good. It certainly gives you a lot of volume, but it's not perfect. And it still involves often having to go through and pick off individual comments or interviews for follow-up to really dig deeper into the meaning of what somebody actually said.
People say what they do, what they don't do. What they say is something that when I was practicing UX research back in the days, this was always like running in the back of my mind. Have you found that true as well, or do you believe that having a really good interview is accurate enough? And in some cases, do you actually back it with more the transactional data, or from the different sources that you mentioned, to really get into like, did that person actually do what they say? Or how are you thinking about getting to the real answer and knowing that you actually have it?
What people do and say is actually, you just hit on direct marketing, right? Like, that's often where you have to start with direct marketers. When you're trying to bring in attitudinal data, they'll say, well, we're measuring what people do, not what they say. And they're not wrong. We know with the Canadian census, people every year over-report how much they give to charity. And it's not to lie intentionally. It's just, we all kind of have a self-serving bias, and we do say things that we either just don't get around to doing. So I think that's important to acknowledge that we are measuring what people do. So you have to start, I think, kind of like with a big funnel, and you get these comments and you get these interviews, and I think you also look to mirror that with the data you're getting in your surveys, which might be a little bit more statistically significant. But then again, you're building out a journey or an experience based on this needs list, based on what people told you repeatedly, and then you test things. You build a prototype, and you go back to potentially that group of people you spoke to and say, you said this. Does this resonate with what you said? Does this experience, would that answer that unmet need that you have right now? And hopefully the answer is yes. If not, you go back to the drawing board and you iterate, reiterate, but then you do have to test it. So, we would create an A/B test. We would do 2 different streams or 3 different streams to really see, did improving this experience actually result in higher lifetime value? Because at the end of the day, we're trying to inspire people to give, but we need them to give, right? We are still being, as marketers and fundraisers and salespeople, we are still measured on how much revenue comes in. So that is the end goal at the end of the day. And so we do need to, make sure those experiences that we've created are grounded in something, but then test that to see if we've actually hit the mark properly.
How do you make sure that if you focus on lifetime value, and the easy thing to optimize is just get a lot more people to subscribe with their credit card to donate like $12, $25 every month, how do you make sure that they actually retain and turn into lifelong donators for the program? Like, how do you balance those two things?
Yeah, I think firstly we would just use transactional data, our churn or our retention, attrition, and we just see where are people falling off, and we know, depending on how that monthly donor was acquired, the retention typically is very early in the process where they've made that decision, but now they're regretting it. They have buyer's remorse. They didn't actually want to give $30 every single month. Maybe they just wanted to give $30 one time. So you have to start there, and then I think that's when you start inserting your journey touch points. You start figuring out, why did somebody actually sign up? What was that need in them that, they wanted to support the Red Cross? It was something happening in their community, or it was something happening worldwide. Have we found a way to meet that need and then continue meeting that need? And I think, though, as you go beyond sort of that engagement or that onboarding or that use journey, then you really have to start looking at, how you're going to engage people long term, but also make their experience easy. Like, do they need to change their credit card, right? How hard did we just make it, right? Like, we're working on a program right now, or a product, I guess I should say, where we make it very easy to update your credit card, because people's credit cards, do fail all the time. Often they get stolen or they just get renewed. How hard are we actually making it to take somebody's money? Because if we're making somebody, have to go on the website, send an email, then call into our contact center, they're probably already feeling kind of irritated, and maybe they won't actually fulfill what we hope would be the end of that journey, where they actually give that credit card. So I think, looking at satisfaction outside of engagement is also just making people's lives easy. Like, they're already not getting a product or service from us for their donation. So we need to make sure that we do everything in our power to make it easy to give and to continue giving.
How does your team is structured? I want to switch gears a bit to understanding the relationship between marketing and CX a bit better, because I'm fascinated by how you're talking about it as if this is like one end-to-end team that is like cutting across silos and works beautifully well. And maybe it does. So can we dig into that a bit?
Yeah,
How is your team structured? So you have direct marketing, and then there's customer experience, or you're a customer experience advocate. Like, how does this piece together with the broader organization?
Yeah, I hope I'm not sounding too confident, because certainly, we don't have as perfect of a CX, organizational structure as, we might like, but, we're building towards that. I'd say we do have CX sort of in a couple of different pockets. We certainly have our contact center, and we have what we call our donor services, donor relations team. We're the front line to handling donor complaints, donor inquiries. But then I think, within direct marketing, which sits outside of contact center, is we have a CX team within that integrated marketing structure. So that team is looking at touch points all across direct marketing. So trying to make sense out of, the data, making sure the data isn't duplicating, just making sure that, we're not over soliciting or over engaging, making sure we're measuring the right experiences, helping some of these direct marketing teams to actually map out their journeys, maybe in a way they had before. So that's sort of we have kind of two core CX teams. We have sort of that more strategic level with journey mapping. And then we have maybe more of our operational level, which is more of our contact center and frontline services team. So increasingly, those two teams are working, considerably more closely together. And so we're trying to identify, if we just sent out 300,000 pieces of mail, there's probably going to be an impact on the contact center. And in the past, we all knew it. We just didn't really do anything about it. Whereas now we're in much better contact to help do employee training when, in direct mail, we send out what we call in Canada anyways, premium items. It might be pens or calendars. And not everybody likes those things, but they do a really good job of converting donors. But we also need to be ready for complaints and people who don't want to receive them further. But it's critical that we've educated that frontline team. So that strategic side has educated that frontline operational team to understand, well, this is why we send that. So at least that agent buys into that and, can have that conversation with the donor. And at the end of it, if the donor says, I get it, I still don't want that, do we have a way to deal with that?
What about the other teams outside of marketing and service or support and CX? Who is close to you in getting, let's say, an end-to-end journey implemented all the way through? What other peers do you have, and how does that, like, when you have to make a big decision, is that a matter of like Andrew and his team are coming together and here's the pros and cons, here's the data, here's the research, here's the decision, and here's the financial impact on the business, let's go? Or is there more like a rigorous structure into how you make decisions across these different teams?
Yeah, I'd say it's sort of in between. Maybe one example I can give you. So we have a type of fundraising called planned giving. It's popular in North America, where a donor actually leaves a donation in their last will and testament. So it might be, I'm going to leave $10,000 to the Canadian Red Cross upon my death, or I'm going to leave 5% of my house worth. And so, as you can imagine, those are pretty sizable donations. But when we talk about end-to-end journey, that is a really long journey, because as I mentioned, it's planned giving, and somebody does have to pass away before that donation is realized. But what was their commitment like to the cause during life, right? And so they might have started giving to us when they were 35 years old. Maybe they started giving a monthly donation, and they were giving that monthly donation all the way up until the end. So, they weren't contributing a huge amount of money in life, but, we've had to measure and optimize that experience, throughout their lives so that when they go to their lawyer and the lawyer says, are there any donations that you want to leave to charities, they think about us. Again, we're not the only game in town, but how have we branded to that donor? How have we improved their life by showing them that we have taken their money and we're a good place to put that, and so they can leave the ultimate gift, when they do pass away. So that team is a different team from us, but they'll come to us and they'll want to understand, well, what are these donors receiving now, and how can we understand that a little bit better? How can we have that conversation with somebody and then actually ask the question to them, would you consider leaving a donation to the Red Cross in your will?
Is there a way where all these teams are coming together using the same journeys, the same metrics, the same things to look at? Or is it every silo has their own KPIs, and every now and then we rally the cage and we bring everyone together? Like, how does that work operationally?
Yeah, I think, when there's a big disaster is probably the best example of when the teams kind of drop maybe their day to day and we all have to come together with the same purpose now. We're all working on the same campaign. And so that's where I think, that data and those insights become valuable to everybody. Where are people getting stuck in the process? What was their view, to the donation experience? Why did they want to give? What was the misinformation they were seeing, online? So I'd say, we're increasingly, people come to me and my team, when they want to map that journey or to sort of even understand, our tools. If maybe they just want to whiteboard, they want to whiteboard what they think their experience looks like now, where they think the pain points are, and they'll come to us and say, can you help us understand if this is actually true? And that's where we'll may potentially, set that up for them, and we'll train them on how to do some of these, design thinking interviews to come up with those needs lists.
Do you also train them in how to bring it back to the business, or bring it back to how to articulate the value? Because I see a lot of CX professionals, people in customer experience, designers, researchers, they know exactly what their customers need, but it's really hard to get the rest of the company to see it in that way because of all the other priorities that are going on. And then CX is like put into this corner where it's like, yeah, okay, great, you have all these insights, but so what? So how do you make sure that that actually is looped back into the growth of donors, or understanding the growth of the Canadian Red Cross in general?
Yeah, it's certainly not a unique CX problem that often, you can't actually implement the findings that you come up with. And so, you certainly do have to take the view of, what's in it for this other team, right? Like, how are they going to meet their targets? How is what we're doing going to improve what they're doing? And certainly, posing it to them in terms of like, I'm not asking you to do additional work. I'm hoping this actually makes your work smarter and more effective and more impactful. And then when they do some of those interviews, coming back with them, and again, going to a whiteboard, a mural or a Miro, and then coming up again with what those needs lists are, and then looking at that experience, figuring out like, where can we actually implement that? And then how can we share that? Because that feedback loop is so critical, because, you might record something, but how are you actually going to use it? So having feedback loops built into the process where, again, you're not getting too far down the path where you're doing the wrong work. You're, hopefully you're failing quickly, but that feedback loop that you have the opportunity to share and learn and just kind of bring that knowledge to be more institutional.
Is there also close feedback loop on the bigger campaigns you're doing for everyone involved? Because just as much as I can imagine for a donor, seeing that you actually like matched your donation and seeing that all through, it's the same for making an impact on the customer experience and therefore on the Red Cross, right? Oh, this work that we're doing was impactful. Is there a way that you have established this to all the people that were involved in any of this work to really show the impact of their work? Is that something that you have put in place?
We're really just starting now to implement closed loop. So, we're working with a product right now where, again, we're identifying maybe it's kind of the low hanging fruit. So, somebody mentions that they don't want to receive direct mail when they've just made a donation on the website. Well, how do we action that? We have a ticket created that will follow up. And so, we don't necessarily want to just take people off. Often we can have the conversation with somebody and we could say, well, how many times can we, send you mail for you? How about 4 times a year versus 11 now? And that often, will suffice for the donor. And we've certainly seen that taking that proactive approach really does improve that donor experience, because it really is, it's kind of minimal surprise and delight. But I think, all of us are used to filling out surveys that just go nowhere. Nobody ever responds. Nobody ever comes back, and nothing's actually action. When we've done interviews with donors who have told us, they don't like direct mail. The amount of people who've said you're the only organization that called me back. You're the only organization that actually did that. So it's just something, again, I don't know if this would resonate so much in the European sense, but something I talk about, with, say, an onboarding journey is in the serving industry, you talk about touching the table. It's when the server comes by and acknowledges your presence. So they may be really busy and they're not taking your order in that moment, but they've acknowledged that you sat down. So you're not sitting there wondering, is somebody ever going to come take my drink order? And that's what we're trying to do as well, is just acknowledge that we hear you. We'd like to help you. But, almost doing that unprovoked, because they might make a comment, but they're not actually expecting somebody to open a ticket and do something about it. So again, that's sort of that surprise and delight where we're proactively, handling that issue before it really becomes an issue and somebody unsubscribes from our communications altogether.
The interesting thing here is that blending marketing and CX over the 14 years that you have been doing has probably led you to a few mistakes as well. I'm curious, what is the thing you learned from the most that maybe was a very unobvious thing, but what is a mistake that you made where you're like, this made me actually way better at my job by making that, and now I'm not making it anymore? What is the biggest mistake that comes to mind?
Well, I think, I've mentioned empathy before and understanding what people actually want. I think one way that any organization, kind of gets CX or journey mapping wrong is they solve a problem that actually doesn't exist. And so, they might create this super engaging online experience. It's multimedia, it's cool looking, it's fun, it's artistic, and no one cares. Because what we actually hear sometimes is, in our circles is, people actually just want to go online or go to the call center, make their donation, and end the experience. That's it. They didn't actually need a full multimedia experience. And creating that, is expensive. And it took time. And I think, looking at, before you get to that stage, did you really base that experience in something you actually learned? Or is it that we thought it looked cool and we couldn't wait to show this in a PowerPoint to our executives? It looks so impressive. And, the technology is that's at the top of its game. So I think that's sort of, one of the big aha moments for me is not solving problems that don't exist.
What are the other things that are really hard in practice that you've seen other maybe marketing leaders bridging the gap between customer experience and marketing? What are some of the other pitfalls that people should be mindful of when trying to blend these two?
Yeah, I think, often they don't do it. I think, a lot of organizations, do treat customers or donors like cash machines. And again, they look solely at those direct marketing metrics, and it's a very finite period of time. It's that instant gratification of, we sent this, we got this response back, but have we actually stopped people from giving further on? Have we given the opportunity to personalize that experience, like I mentioned earlier in our example, and just not looking at it like that? Again, just not bringing that level of empathy, not taking off, your hat in terms of where you work and looking at this from a donor or a customer's perspective. And so again, I'll often start an exercise like that with our teams of, yes, you're here because your subject matter expertise, but don't let that cloud some of your ideas. Like, would you as a donor actually want this? It's something I've said recently to our teams is, no donor or customer is sitting there thinking, well, I would love an automated 4-email series that has, a welcome and a survey at the end, right? Nobody thinks like that, but we do, right? Like, that's often what we do as marketers. And so, again, just building that into empathy and understanding, like, does somebody actually want that? And what are we going to do with it? Or is it actually going to be off-putting for them?
What is the most creative way that you've been able to make sure that connection is established? Because it is highly transactional when you explain it like that, but I can also imagine that you're not only competing with other places where people can donate their money, but you're literally competing with all the other things in the world where people can put their money, right? So what are some of the creative ways that you actually truthfully get a person to donate where they wholeheartedly agree that was the best thing to do with their money?
What we're finding, we're building this journey out right now, and it really is, particularly based on, new donors who give because of something that happened in the world where there's a lot of media attention, right? Like, we get a lot of what I'll call free acquisition because of media sources. When something, catastrophic happens in the world, a lot of people come to us knowing that, we do that kind of work. I think having that process where, again, you can understand, why somebody was giving, but that tying that back. And so I think one thing that we in the past have not done all that well is we actually didn't set any expectations. And so, quite frankly, we met those expectations because they were zero, right? And that is not a good way to look at a donor, right? That's not an ongoing relationship. And so we're really trying now to set that level of this is what you can expect. This is how we're going to report to you. This is how you can make changes. Really empowering somebody. And I think actually, when I think back to the needs list, that word empowering is something that came out a lot. And it's what we call an innate need. So nobody said, I need to be empowered. But we learned that through these different interviews where people were telling us, I feel helpless. I can't go to these places in the world and help somebody who's been impacted by a disaster, but you can, and I can give you money. That was one of those learnings that we had and that experience design that we had of how do we make somebody feel helpless to empowered, like I made a difference, right? And so that there's no silver bullet for that, and it's evolving all the time, but it's being creative and it's finding ways to, be conversational and acknowledging problems, right? Like acknowledging that, the way our fundraising works is necessary, right? We don't send out mail because we don't like the environment. We send it out because it's such an important way of how we actually build our programs and services. But having that conversation with people, people are intelligent. They understand that when we kind of have that conversation, but, not arguing about it if it's still not a means they want. Again, having that, just that kind conversation where you can take somebody off a list, but building that into the process, knowing that somebody might have that kind of complaint and, not shying away from it.
Are you seeing needs change that often? Because I can imagine that you have built out, like you mentioned, personas, and you understand like truly what some of those people who are part of that persona need. But as we're shifting, as these whole big changes are impacting the way we're thinking about the world, have you seen that shift tremendously, let's say over the course of 14 years? Because have been a few big events where people are also rethinking basically how they live, how they work. Have you seen that shift that much? Or is it more like the amount of people that belong to a certain persona, a certain need state are growing and shrinking in size? Or is there like truly deep differences between the needs today versus like maybe 10 years ago?
Yeah, I don't know if I've seen a tremendous shift. Certainly demographics are always changing. And typically with charity, people give more to charity as they get older. It makes sense. You're usually more financially stable, as you're, mid-career, retirement, that sort of thing. Again, depending on if you have children or dependents. So I think that's something that, we've been trying to adapt to. Certainly COVID, changed things in terms of, were people at work during the day, or how else do you want to reach them? Like it certainly has taught us having that multi-channel approach is necessary. I use the example where, I got an email one morning because I had to reorder the protein powder that I take every day, but I was working, right? Like I didn't do anything about it. But later that night I got a text message. I'm like, okay, I'm sitting on the couch, now I can do this. So I think knowing that, you're not necessarily going to have somebody's attention in that moment, depending on how, their life has changed, how their job has changed, having different ways to engage with people. And again, I think that comes down to how they personalize that experience. Some people are fine getting text messages from an organization. Some people aren't. Some people view it as, no, I text with my children. I don't want to text with any organization. So I think adapting to demographics is important. Certainly I've seen more focus on the environment. And again, I talk about, direct mail because it's paper-based. And so certainly our digital programs have increased and the maturity of that has grown exponentially, but there's still a huge number of donors who give checks. They still get that piece of mail. They actually still like getting that. And that is how they choose to give. So it's continuing to understand your donor segments, knowing that some people want this, others don't. And, it's collecting that data. And I talk about personalizing the experience, but we can't personalize it if we don't have that data. So that zero-party data, that voluntary data that we're trying to collect, in volume, and put that in our CRM so that we can start to segment better, so that we can build better products, so that it's not just this one-size-fits-all model.
What is the way people work differently in an organization like yours versus commercially? Because I'm fascinated by the way you are explaining this. It is a one-on-one mapping to commercial-oriented business for profits. And yet the goals are definitely different. But I can also imagine that it attracts a certain amount of people that truly want to work for the cause and have a slightly different approach to transactional deals, if you want to put it that way, where donors are putting their money. Is that a fair assumption? Or is there actually no difference between a commercial or for-profit organization that's run this way versus a donor-based organization like Red Cross?
Yeah, I think it certainly depends on the size of the organization. So the Red Cross is a very large organization. So it's very comparable, to financial institutions, insurance institutions, that sort of thing. I think, often we structure very similarly, with our contact centers. We all have legacy data systems that don't talk to each other very well and that sort of thing. I think sort of maybe the people who are attracted to work at a nonprofit are maybe a little bit different. They maybe could make more money in a for-profit sector, but it's a value to them, every day to be working at something where they know there's, it's for a good cause. I feel very confident in explaining, why we fundraise the way we do, because without that, we actually couldn't act. We couldn't be anywhere in the world within 24 hours, right? So I'm very comfortable having that conversation with somebody as to why we solicit donations the way that we do, because it is doing good. So I think maybe that's kind of one of the nuances. But I think in terms of the way that teams are structured, certainly financial institutions or something like that are more mature. They've certainly had more capital to invest in their systems, but I think a lot of those systems are actually starting to become more affordable. And I think you're starting to see nonprofit organizations really starting to engage with those types of data systems or digital platforms and that sort of thing.
Is there also a big shift into putting the customer or the donor first, or has that always been the case? It's just now we're talking about it. Now we have things like design thinking under our belt. We know what a journey is. We're practicing journey management. These are all modern practices established in the last, let's say, decade in a lot of large organizations. Was it also, when you started, for instance, comparing that to where you are today, was it more like a traditional organized business with a lot of processes, a lot of silos, a lot of different teams not communicating, but still organized around the donor? Or is that actually something that you are also going through as almost like a transformation, where you're putting that customer or that donor truly in the heart of everything that you are doing?
Yeah, I'd say any nonprofit organizations talks about being donor-centric. Whether they do it or not is a very different thing. We all want to
Right.
put that donor at the center. But the reality is, like you had mentioned, the internal processes, right? Like I remember one thing we mapped, and it was more of a business process than a customer journey, but it was what happens to that monthly donor when their donation stops. So often people's credit card donations stop just because their card renewed, or that it was fraudulent or something like that. And we saw how many steps it took to reprocess somebody's donation. We made it really hard for people to voluntarily give us money, right? Like that is not donor centric. So we still have a long way to go, because our finance team, right? Like they have, regulations that they have to meet. And so the customer at the center of their experience, not quite as important as say ours, being more on the front line, but working with them and finding ways to be like, well, but we're making it really hard to take people's money, even though they want to give us money. And so we're trying to work that through sort of, and I'd say the easiest way to do it is, start with a path of least resistance. Don't start with the team who is going to fight you the very first time you have that conversation. Like build buy-in, right? Like find those small wins, show other examples of teams that you've worked with where you did find insights, where you have improved the process, and hopefully it makes their lives easier, whether it's, a move to a different technology or, retraining or something like that. But yeah, starting, I think, with some of those parts of your organization that are more likely to want to evolve.
What have you found useful to get buy-in early on? I mean, a lot of organizations are now getting this, and what I'm seeing is that having an executive sponsor in your C-suite or on the executive team that truly gets it and wants to make sure that this gets priority and is actually executed across all these different teams is essential.
Yeah.
Is that also something that you found to be true and you got it early on? Or what are the ways that you've managed to get buy-in in the early stages to organize these teams around the donor and their journeys?
Yeah, it's definitely much easier if you have somebody senior or an organization just telling people they have to do it. When we had one kind of cross-departmental issue, a couple of years back, I used to joke, I said, the reason we solved it is because our CEO told us we had to. And we did, right? Like we did it because we had to. And so that was easy. But often I think, like we've been trying to build CX a little bit more bottom up. It was not, CX again almost conflicts with with the donor because it's not a customer, right? So finding ways, I think, to sort of soften that language to something that's a little bit more appropriate within that, that nonprofit space. But I think, figuring out like, what does leadership care about? So again, I keep talking about direct mails. It's one of the programs I run. Our senior leaders know how important that revenue source is, but they're also often the brunt of criticism about the direct mail program, how it impacts the environment, the cost to run it, that sort of thing. So one of our key journeys that we've been working on since the fall is just that complaint journey with direct mail, and being able to show our senior leaders, this is actually what we've done to change that process. This is where we found the pain point, but we need your buy-in to help us push that through. But I think if you can align with what the senior organizers want, whether it's looking at your annual report, your strategic plan over the next 5 years, I think if you can align to things like that, that's how you'll build buy-in with your senior employees.
Right. So what you're actually saying is that you had quantifiable metrics that tied to revenue growth that you then used in that key journey for showing where the friction was that you wanted to solve for.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
They were behind this, getting that done.
Yeah,
Yes,
and it took some time, and I had to ask, I needed to trust the process. I can't get this done in a week. It's going to take time to map out, the complex business processes, talk to donors, work across departments. But if you can get that, explain, this is what we're trying to get to. We're trying to decrease complaints. We're trying to not have such a brand risk. So we've certainly found that, and certain teams who, like our communications team, for example, they monitor our social media. So they'll come and they'll say, like, we're seeing all these complaints coming in. So when we said to them, we're working on a journey to make this better, their eyes immediately lit up because it makes their lives better to know that there's going to be less complaints coming in, to work with their staff, to empower them to have the right information if those complaints come into different channels.
Yeah, that's just a great example. I'm seeing so many organizations have this, that I know everyone calls them frontline. I mean, it's a dangerous place, right?
Sure.
But let's say your frontline staff, they hear this, right? They hear this at like the moment it happens. And when you have enough data, you probably need to look into a completely different part of the business, into the experience of where the actual problem is. And typically, because those systems, those data, those people, those insights are not being able to be shared, they are stuck. And if you actually are able to pull all these threads together, feeding that back into what you're saying and then back up again to what the business cares about, then you're actually having an integrated system. But this is so hard to pull through to in practice. If you had a magic wand, what would be the one thing that you would wave away, like the one thing you would get rid of? A process bottleneck, something maybe like in your journeys, in your donor experience, like what would be the one thing that you could magically wave away to make everything better?
The sentence, we've always done it this way, where, we've had this again, I've been here 15 years. There are processes that haven't changed in 15 years. And they're so archaic, right? And again, it's not from bad intent. And it's hard to change processes. That's what change management is. And that's part of CX as well, is how do we communicate that change? And what's the benefit? Why are we even making this? Why are we doing this? Why are we spending money and time doing that in the first place? But yes, certainly if you can kind of get rid of that attitude, well, we do this and it works, but, maybe it could work a whole lot better. And, we'd have, we'd make more money. We'd have more impact.
What is the ultimate end state for you? Are you going to do another 14 years? Are you going to build this out until all these processes have been gone and we are not saying we've done it like this and that's why we're doing it? Where is Andrew going with this?
Yeah, I'm pretty patient in terms of, like you said, I've been here 14 years and, I'm happy to keep building this out, and it takes time to evoke change. But, I'd love to see sort of, a centralized, CX team, which goes across, all of philanthropy. And that's just the start, because the Red Cross doesn't exist to raise money. We raise money because we exist to help people. And, that's, sort of, I think that next evolution, once we get it right within philanthropy and fundraising, how do we then expand that out? Volunteers, volunteers are also donors, but they're a big part of the brand. The programs who actually, the frontline staff who are actually in some of these places doing the actual work, they're not like me sitting behind a desk, like they're actually out doing, dangerous, meaningful work. How do we bring them into CX and make that, just kind of, that really is right at the center. So, you see that circle and that stand, being, customer donor centric is right at the heart of that, and bringing all of those different viewpoints in. And you mentioned at the top, 6,000 employees, that's not a small ask. That will certainly take time to build out, but I think, you have to decompartmentalize it and build it out, one department, one focus area at a time.
I would love to do another interview in 10 years
Yeah.
and then see if all of this is true, right? Or maybe we should do it next year.
Yeah.
I don't know how fast you want to go. You're patient, man, you said. So this is awesome. Thank you so much, Andrew, for joining me today. If people want to know more or are working for a nonprofit or are blending marketing and CX, where can they find you if you want to chat with them?
Sure, yeah. You'll find me on LinkedIn. You can always email me, andrew.george at redcross.ca. Either I'd be happy to talk with anybody.
All right. We'll put that in the show notes. And Andrew, this was phenomenal. Maybe again, a rain check in 2 years to see if that prediction is coming through. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me. Thanks for inviting me.
All right, and that's it. Thank you so much for listening. If you found this valuable today, don't forget to subscribe to the Experience Edge on your favorite podcast channel, leave a review, and share it with your team. I'd be delighted. Today's episode was brought to you by Daydo, the AI journey management solution for enterprise. To have an edge on your business strategy and to know why your customers do what they do, visit daydo.com and explore more resources to accelerate your customer experience game. And remember, the journey to creating customer-centric impact never ends, and here's always a new edge to discover in doing things differently. Next week, new episode. Until then, keep pushing the edge and stay inspired. See you in the next episode.